Welcome to Paulogia. We're a former Christian. Wait, where's my background?
Oh yeah, you're not on your channel, you're doing a video for Professor Stick.
Okay. And why am I doing a video for Professor Stick?
Oh, because I told him you would? And also you're welcome.
Okay then. Well, if we're in Stickland, we're gonna want to be a little more sticky. Stick-like? Stick-esque?
I feel like I'm gonna go with Sticky.
And my usual creationist stuff from Ken Ham and Kent Hovind isn't gonna cut it for Stick. It needs to be more...
Let's go with eccentric. And you have come to the right girl because I collect eccentric. Let's try this guy.
And everyone agrees the Bible and the theory of evolution both agree birds came from the ground.
They come from the ground, Paul.
Birds came from the ground.
Birds come from the ground. You know what? Have fun.
That'll do just fine.
Hi, my name is John S. Pennington Jr., and thanks for tuning in today.
John S. Pennington Jr. That sounds a little like VHS-era creationists.
I'm chemist John Morris Pendleton.
But they don't look related. What's the story on John S. Pennington Jr.? Fortunately, it seems he's turned his name into a website. John S. Pennington Jr. is currently a high priest in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A Mormon creationist, wow. That's different than the fundamentalist evangelical Christians we usually hear from. He's the author of a book, Big Bang Theory versus the Bible, where his byline lists Brother Pennington as the co-founder of a $14 billion private equity fund. As I dig through his material, I'm definitely getting an argument for big bank account vibe. Of course, a person doesn't need to have formal training in science or theology to have insights in those fields, but there sure are a lot of words about how his business background gives him qualifications, somehow. According to the back cover, this author's perspective uses logical fact patterns that enables true intellect. I'm not sure what a logical fact pattern is, but I like logic, and facts, and patterns. And who wouldn't want to enable true intellect?
Today we're going to compare the Bible with the science of evolution.
The science of evolution? Don't creationists usually call evolution a religion, or worse? Wait a minute. Brother Pennington's website says he brings religion and science together by using the truths of the Big Bang Theory, evolution, astronomy, mathematics, statistical probabilities, and the solar system. If he thinks that Big Bang cosmology and biological evolution are truths, maybe we're just all going to agree.
And we're going to compare the similarities between the two stories, because it's ironic that Moses gets it so correct in the Bible.
If you believe that the Bible is divinely inspired, is ironic the word you want to use when it happens to align with reality? It's ironically correct?
As the theory of evolution has come to fruition in the last 20 years.
Evolution has come to fruition in the last 20 years? Like, evolution was invented in 1999. The first 150 years since Darwin's Origin of the Species was just some kind of pet project, but we finally got serious about it? Or does fruition mean that the arrival of Gen Z somehow completed the process? Evolution is all done now?
Let me give you an example here. Here we go. Moses, mind you, 3,300 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to try not to interrupt him too much. But 3,300 years ago means Brother Pennington believes Genesis was written around 1300 BC. It's too much detail to go into now, but most modern Christian and Jewish scholars place the writing or compiling of the Pentateuch to be during the exile period of 586 to 539 BC, as affirmed in this article from Christian creation organization Biologos. That's 700 years after Brother Pennington's claim. Too bad his business acumen didn't help him with history, too. At the same time, this is 150 years later than literalist organizations like Answers in Genesis would take. They place it more like 1450 BC. Strange middle ground Pennington's taking here.
Says that plants came from the ground, which is kind of easy to come up with because plants go from the ground.
It sounds like he's focusing on the Genesis 2 account of creation rather than the conflicting six-day story in Genesis 1. Genesis 2:9 says, "The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground." Out of the ground. It doesn't say that the plants were made of ground, which is good, because they're not.
However, then he says that the fowl or birds also came from the ground, which is a concept that's kind of hard to come up with.
Genesis 2:19, "Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky." This is different from the plants. The animals and birds didn't just emerge from the ground. The ground is apparently the raw materials used by Creator God.
He also says the beasts came from the ground, and then he says that Adam doesn't come from the ground, but it says he came from the dust of the ground. The Bible actually says that there was the dust of the ground, and God put a little bit of mist over that ground or some water and created Adam's body.
If that sounds a little strange to you, it might be because of the Bible translation you're familiar with. Genesis 2:6 in the King James says, "But there went up a mist from the earth, and watered the whole face of the ground." But other translations use words like stream, fog, dew, or vapor. Or maybe it just sounds strange because it's strange.
So my question to my atheist friends and my agnostic friends is, how does Moses get it so correctly?
Wait, get what so correctly?
If he's just writing a book of fiction, how did he know this? I'll give you an example. What you want me to believe is Moses was sitting there writing down the book of Genesis.
First, very few Old Testament scholars would affirm that Moses wrote Genesis. There's not even consensus that Moses was a historical person, but we'll leave that aside for now. It is near consensus that the first 5 books of the Bible were stitched together from multiple documents, anywhere from 3 to 10 different sources depending on who you talk to. Even Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis, the most conservative of the major creation organizations, acknowledge that the textual evidence points to multiple sources. They attribute Genesis 1 and 2 to Adam, insisting though that Moses would have been the editor, so they can justify Jesus calling these the books of Moses.
And he saw a bird fly overhead and say, hey, you know what? That bird came from the ground.
First, has Brother Pennington never seen a bird on the ground, scratching in the dirt for food? Never seen a chicken? Is he saying that the more intuitive idea would be that birds were formed out of air or wind? Brother Pennington is supposing that the author of Genesis was somehow isolated from the thinking of all other ideas and cultures around him. There is ample evidence that Genesis was at least influenced by, if not directly copied, the earlier Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, where the goddess Ninhursag created humans from clay. But we can even set aside these stronger influence claims and merely observe that creating creatures from clay, mud, or dirt was commonplace in the ancient world. Prometheus did in Greek mythology, as did Enki and Enlil in Sumerian, Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Num in Egypt, Nuwa in China, Parvati, mother of Ganesh in Hindu, Viracocha in Inca mythology, and on and on and on. Brother Pennington wants us to be astonished about the counterintuitive novelty of claiming creatures came from the ground. The obviously divine revelation the author must have had to come up with such an idea. And yet, seemingly every culture had the same inclination. Are we to be impressed with the scientific prowess of all of these creation myths?
Now, it is correct, but how did he know that? It's just like if I told you right now, see that jet airplane flying through the air? That jet airplane came from the ground. The metal came from the ground. The plastics came from the ground. The rubber on the tires came from the ground. The fuel in the tanks came from the ground. And even the glass in the windows is sand heated up that came from the ground. So when I tell you that a jet airplane flying through the air came from the ground, I am telling you the truth. The fact that I don't tell you how long it took man to make a plane or how they actually did make a plane doesn't mean it's not true.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
I mean, if from the ground you literally just mean from materials contained within the atmosphere of the Earth, then yeah, everything on Earth is made from the ground. This is the least mind-blowing claim you could possibly make.
Evolution says plants came from the ground. So check that box, they agree.
If you mean that land plants grow in soil, then we don't really need a worldview of origins to affirm this. But if we're talking about where plants originated, consensus is that the first plants were marine-based. Photosynthetic microbes, then algae, for over 500 million years before the first plants arrive on land in the mid-Ordovician period. This would be an evolutionary no.
Evolution says birds came from the ground.
I couldn't begin to imagine how evolution would affirm birds coming from the ground. I scoured his website, and this little clip was the closest I could find.
And most scientists believe that it all came from a pool of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, water, and some burst of energy ignited life.
The voiceover doesn't mention the ground, but the graphic says Earth. The most promising models of abiogenesis have life beginning in the oceans, not on land. Without the presence of life and organics, the ground really isn't even a source for nitrogen. Strangely, Brother Pennington's more produced video here posits panspermia as the explanation for how God might have created plants before the sun, as suggested in Genesis 1. But if plant life came from space, then it didn't come from the ground. I'm starting to think his theories aren't coherent. Also, this website video has almost the same content as his YouTube video, but with much higher production value.
What I just told you was true. The metal came from the ground, the plastics came from the ground, the rubber on the tires came from the ground, the fuel in the tanks came from the ground.
Looks like he may have dipped into that big bank account to help promote his book. But why make this new whiteboard version after the fact?
They agree with the Bible. Evolution says the beast came from the ground. Check that box.
Nope. Abiogenesis probably started in water, utilizing chemicals from the air, but the common ancestors of all land animals were definitely aquatic. In fact, Brother Pennington would have had a better argument if he'd stuck to the Genesis 1:20 account, where God created marine life first.
Evolution says Adam, dust of the ground, came from tiny particles of the ground.
No. Just no.
They seem to me to come together. And I've always had the theory that science and religion must one day come together.
Why? It seems we could potentially just abandon religion altogether.
Well, today I've just shown you how you're one step closer to that. Because, again, if I don't tell you how a jet came from the ground, or how a bird came from the ground, it doesn't mean it's not true.
Even if I bought your premise here, it might still be true if you interpret things just right, is not a helpful standard.
But a jet did come from the ground, and everyone agrees, the Bible and the theory of evolution both agree, birds came from the ground.
They don't.
So anyway, my name is John S. Pennington Jr. Go to www.johnspenningtonjr.com if you'd like to hear more.
If you'd like to hear more of my videos responding to the claims of Christians in the area of science, theology, and news, you should check out my channel, Paulogia. Do a search, or there should be a link in the description. Also check out the brilliant Shannon Q, where she engages in complex conversations and elevates the discourse. I'm sure Professor Stick will be back soon, but until then, check us out. Thanks for watching.